The heat that summer was the kind that presses down on you, a physical weight on your shoulders. I was sitting on my back porch, the wood warm beneath my feet, trying to coax the faded ink of an old county map back to life. It's what I do. Or what I did. I'm a cartographer, retired. Funny thing is, they retire you, but your eyes never stop measuring the world, tracing the hidden lines. My old stereoscope, the one that lets you see the land in 3 dimensions from old aerial photos, sat on the table beside me, cool brass in the shimmering air. Peace is a fragile thing. Mine was shattered by the angry buzz of an outboard motor. A sleek little powerboat cut across the lake and pulled up to my pier, the one I built with my father, board by board, 50 years ago. The smell of gasoline and lake water hit me, a combination that always means trouble. Out stepped Brad, the treasurer of our Homeowners Association. He had teeth too white for our small town, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He didn't wave, he didn't say hello. He strode onto my dock like he'd owned it his whole life, holding a laminated sign and a tube of something that looked like industrial adhesive. Without a word, he slapped the sign onto the main post of the pier, leaving a thick, ugly smear of clear glue. I stood up, the old wooden chair groaning in protest. The sign read, in big bold letters, Private Lake, access by permit only. "Good news, Martin," Brad said, his voice slick and cheerful. He turned, finally acknowledging me. "We're finalizing a new blanket insurance policy for the community. Your contribution is going to be a real help." I walked down the steps, my bare feet stopping just short of the dock. "What are you talking about, Brad? What is this?" I pointed at the sign. He just smiled wider. "Protection. We had an independent risk assessment done, found a severe risk of dam failure at the north end, unstable ground on the east bank, not to mention the fire hazard with this dry spell." I stared at him. "There is no dam. The east bank is solid granite. I know. I mapped it for the county 20 years ago." "What insurance?" I asked, my voice tight. "A mandatory one," he said, his tone finally losing its fake cheer. $1,200 a month. The number hung in the hot, still air between us. $1,200 for a risk that didn't exist. "It's not your pier anymore, Martin," he said, tapping the freshly glued sign with a manicured finger. "It's a liability, one we all have to pay for." He got back in his boat and sped away, leaving a churning wake that slapped against the pilings of my pier. My pier. I walked over and touched the sign. The glue was still tacky, a sticky poison spreading on the wood my father's hands had shaped. This happened to me. And if you're watching Karenology, you know these things are never just a misunderstanding. It's never about a sign. It's about what the sign represents. The first shovelful of dirt on the grave of your peace and quiet. You ever have one of those moments where the world just goes silent and you can feel the floor dropping out from under you? That was me, standing there, the sun beating down, looking at that sign. $1,200 a month. That's more than my property taxes. It was a threat dressed up as a fee. It was extortion with a 3-ring binder. Later that day, the official email landed. The subject line was Mandatory Special Assessment for Community Risk Mitigation. It was full of corporate jargon that made my head spin. But the message was simple. Pay up, or they'd put a lien on my property. For those of you who don't know, a lien is a legal chain they wrap around your house. You can't sell it, can't refinance it, you can't do anything until you pay the person holding the chain. 200 homes in our community. At Brad's price, that was nearly $500,000 a year, flowing straight into the Homeowners Association's pocket for insuring against a ghost. My first move was the logical one. I logged on to the community web forum. I wrote a calm, detailed post. I identified myself as a retired cartographer who had worked for the county. I explained point by point why the risks were nonsense. No dam, solid rock foundation. I attached a copy of the official geological survey map from the county records. I hit post and felt a small sense of relief. The truth had to count for something, right? I went to make coffee. When I came back 5 minutes later, I refreshed the page. My post was gone. A single line of red text was in its place. This post has been removed by a moderator for violating community guidelines against spreading misinformation. Misinformation. I was the one with the facts, the maps, the lifetime of experience, and I was being silenced. If you've ever been muzzled for telling the truth, You know, the specific kind of hot, helpless anger that floods your chest. If you get what I'm saying, maybe hit that like button. The silence that followed was worse than the argument. I was an island, cut off. I looked out the window, the sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of orange and purple, but the beauty was spoiled. Right there, at the end of my dock, was that gleaming white rectangle, a tombstone for the life I used to have. My phone buzzed on the counter, rattling against the granite. A new post had just gone up on the forum. It was from Brad. The title was a punch to the gut. Community Safety Seminar, tonight. Let's clear up some dangerous misinformation. He wasn't just trying to rob me. He was going to make me the villain in my own story. And I walked right into his trap. The library meeting room was packed, the air thick with the smell of damp raincoats and cheap coffee. It felt less like a community seminar and more like a jury assembly, and I was the one on trial. Brad stood at the front next to a projector screen, radiating smug confidence. He saw me come in and gave a little nod, as if I were the guest of honor at my own execution. "Glad you could make it, Martin," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few heads turned my way. I saw the looks, a mix of pity and annoyance. To them, I was just the grumpy old man rocking the boat. I found a seat in the back, the plastic chair cold and uninviting. Then Brad introduced his star witness, a man named Arthur Finch, a certified risk mitigation consultant. Finch was one of those guys who wears a suit that costs more than my truck. He spoke in a smooth, calm voice, the kind of voice that could tell you your house was on fire and make it sound like an exciting investment opportunity. He clicked through a slideshow. There were terrifying-looking charts with red arrows and a computer simulation of our peaceful shoreline collapsing into the water. It was slick, it was professional, and it was pure fiction. He got to the part about the unstable Eastern Bank. I couldn't help it. I raised my hand. Brad ignored me. Finch kept talking, so I stood up. "That's not accurate," I said, my voice louder than I intended. The room went quiet. "The East Bank is solid bedrock. I have the geological surveys to prove it." Finch looked at Brad. Brad stepped forward, his face a mask of fake concern. "Martin, he said, shaking his head slowly. "We all respect your past work for the county. We really do. But your tenure there, it ended because you had a tendency to see problems where there weren't any, didn't it? The blow landed, hard. It was a low, dirty shot, twisting a painful piece of my past into a weapon. 20 years ago, I was forced into early retirement for refusing to sign off on a zoning variance for a developer. I knew the land was unstable. They built anyway. And a year later, a landslide took out 2 houses. I was right, but they spun it as me being difficult, an obstructionist. The story stuck. Brad knew it, and he used it. "Let's not turn a productive community meeting into one of your personal crusades," he said. You could feel the shift in the room. I wasn't a concerned resident anymore. I was a paranoid crank with a grudge. I sat down, my face burning. The whispers started like snakes rustling in dry leaves. He had won. He'd painted me as a fool, and the whole town was his audience. I left before it was over, the sound of polite applause following me out into the cool night air. Defeat is a cold, heavy coat. I drove home, the streets of my own town feeling alien and hostile. I had the facts, I had the truth, but what good is truth when nobody will listen? What do you do when the lie is just so much more convincing? I was sitting in my dark kitchen, the unopened bottle of bourbon on the table looking like a good friend, when the headlights swept across my window. A small, official-looking pickup truck from the local fire department pulled into my driveway. A young woman in a volunteer firefighter's uniform got out. She looked barely out of her teens, with a bright, no-nonsense energy about her. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked as I opened the door. "I'm Sarah, just doing our annual fire safety checks. Mind if I check your hydrant access and the brush clearance around the property?" I nodded numbly and let her in. She was all business, making notes on a clipboard. She walked to the back of the house, looked toward the lake, and frowned. "This is weird," she said, tapping her pen on her map. "According to the new Homeowners Association plat, the only fire truck access to the lake is the main boat launch. If a fire starts on this side of the community, we'd have to go all the way around. It would take an extra 10 minutes. That's when it hit me. An idea. A flicker of light in the darkness. "Their map is wrong," I said. I went to my study and unrolled one of my old detailed municipal maps on the big table. The paper was yellowed with age, but the lines were still sharp and clear. "Look," I said, my finger tracing a thin dotted line. "Right here, it's a graded fire road, comes in from the west, ends right behind that stand of pines. It hasn't been used in years, but it's there. Evidence 1 to 2. Sarah's eyes widened. "It's not on our new maps. It's like it doesn't exist." And that's when I finally understood. This wasn't just about scamming people with fake insurance. Brad wasn't just lying about the risks. He was actively erasing the truth from the very map of the place we lived. He was creating a fact by wiping out a real one. The question was no longer just about money. It was about why. Why would you deliberately hide a fire road? The keys to his whole scheme weren't in his financial ledgers. They were in the lines he'd erased from the map. The next morning, armed with this new piece of the puzzle, I did what any logical, law-abiding citizen would do. I filed a formal complaint. I spent hours drafting a letter to the State Insurance Commission. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts, cold and hard. I attached copies of the real geological surveys, my old municipal maps showing the fire road, and a summary of the Homeowners Association's risk assessment, highlighting the discrepancies. I felt a surge of old confidence. This was my turf. Bureaucracy, evidence, regulations. I sent it off, certified mail. Checkmate, Brad. Or so I thought. Funny thing about fighting a snake, you can't expect it to play by the rules of a chess match. You ever been so sure you've won, so certain of your position, that you can already taste the victory? That was me for a whole week. I almost started to feel sorry for Brad. Then the letter from the insurance commission arrived. It was thin. That's never a good sign. My hands were shaking a little as I tore it open. My complaint was dismissed. The words on the page were a blur of legalese, but the message was clear. They had reviewed the case and found the Homeowners Association's actions to be in accordance with the findings of a licensed third-party assessor. That was it. Case closed. The system I believed in, the one built on facts and evidence, had just told me my facts didn't matter. But it got worse. The very same afternoon, Brad posted a copy of the dismissal letter on the community forum. His post was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "Friends and neighbors," it began, "I'm relieved to report that the state has affirmed our proactive safety measures. Unfortunately, due to a recent frivolous complaint, our underwriter is now re-evaluating our community's risk profile. We are doing everything we can to prevent a rate hike, but this has made our job much harder." He'd done it again. He'd taken my attack and turned it into a weapon against me. Now, if the insurance rates went up, it wouldn't be his fault for inventing the problem. It would be my fault for questioning it. The phone started ringing. It was a neighbor from down the street yelling at me for making trouble for everyone. An online petition demanding I cease all disruptive activities gained 150 signatures in an hour. I was no longer just a crank. I was a public enemy. My own neighbors were sharpening their pitchforks, and Brad was handing them the torches. The pressure was immense. It felt like the walls were closing in. Every trip to the grocery store became an ordeal of hostile stares and muttered comments. I felt isolated, defeated. I'd played by the rules and lost. The lie was now official, stamped and approved by the state. What else could I do? Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing only makes everything worse? If you have, drop a comment below and let me know. I felt like I was losing my mind. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I found myself in my study, surrounded by my maps. They were my life's work, a testament to a world of order and logic, a world that didn't seem to exist anymore. I picked up my old stereoscope. It was a beautiful tool, a relic from a time when truth was something you could see and touch. My father had given it to me when I graduated. "It lets you see the hidden dimension," he'd said. On a whim, I pulled out a dusty box of old aerial photographs from the county archives, dating back 20 years. They were taken just after the last major survey, the one I had supervised before I was pushed out. I found the 2 corresponding photos of our lake, slid them into the viewer, and adjusted the focus. The world outside my window vanished. In its place was the lake, the trees, the houses, all jumping into crisp, 3-dimensional life. I spent hours just looking, my eyes scanning every inch of the landscape. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe just an escape. I traced the shoreline, the roads, the property lines. I looked at the dangerous east bank that Brad was so worried about. Just as I remembered, solid granite, barely changed in a century. Then, I moved the viewer to the opposite side of the lake, the safe side, the side everyone ignored, and that's when I saw it. It was almost invisible to the naked eye, just a subtle shift in the texture of the trees. But through the stereoscope, in 3D, it was undeniable. A faint, shallow depression, a scar on the land, snaking down from the ridge, the telltale sign of an old, stabilized landslide. A real one. My heart started pounding. I pulled out my new maps, the ones from the Homeowners Association. I lined them up with the aerial photo. And then everything clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The old, forgotten fire road, the one Brad had erased, didn't lead to the fake danger zone. It led directly to this spot, the real danger zone. Brad hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't gotten his directions mixed up. This was deliberate. He was using a fake threat on one side of the lake to distract everyone from the very real and very uninsured threat on the other. He wasn't just a con man. He was playing Russian roulette with our homes, and he had just handed me the loaded gun. But a gun is useless if you're the only one who knows it's loaded. I sat there in the silence of my study, the stereoscope cool against my forehead, the truth laid out before me in 3 dimensions. The smell of old paper and dust filled the room. Brad's scheme was brilliant in its wickedness. By creating a fake crisis on the safe side of the lake, he could sell his overpriced insurance. If a real disaster ever happened on the other side, the side with the old landslide, he and his insurer would be off the hook. The policy wouldn't cover it. It was a perfect victim-blaming crime waiting to happen. I had the proof. But what was it really? A faint shadow on a 20-year-old photograph that only an expert with a vintage piece of equipment could see. After the library disaster and the insurance commission's dismissal, who would believe me? I could already hear Brad's condescending voice. Martin and his conspiracy theories again. Now he's seeing things in old photos. I needed more. I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be dismissed as the ramblings of a bitter old man. I called Sarah, the young volunteer firefighter. I told her I'd found something, but I was vague. I just asked her to meet me at the trailhead of the old, forgotten fire road. She was hesitant, but the urgency in my voice must have convinced her. "Give me an hour," she said. We met as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The entrance to the fire road was almost completely overgrown, choked with weeds and fallen branches. "You see," I said, "it's been deliberately neglected." We pushed our way through the brush. The road itself was still there, a firm bed of gravel and earth beneath the debris. It was usable, barely. We walked for half a mile, the woods growing darker around us. Finally, we came to the spot I'd seen in the stereoscope. Standing there on the ground, you wouldn't notice anything wrong. It just looked like a gentle wooded slope leading down to the water. But I knew what to look for. I pointed to a line of trees, pines and birches, that were all tilted at a slight, unnatural angle. "Look at the trees," I told Sarah. "They're called pistol butts. The ground beneath them has slowly crept downhill over the years, and the trees have tried to correct their growth, bending back toward the sun." She squinted, then her eyes widened. "I see it. It's like they're all leaning." "Exactly," I said. "This is an active creep, a slow-motion landslide, a heavy rain, a small tremor, and this whole hillside could let go." We stood there for a moment in silence, the only sound the chirping of crickets. Sarah pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, her face grim. "If this goes," she said quietly, "it'll take out the Petersons' house and the Miller's deck, and it will completely block the only road out for 5 homes." This was it. This was the non-doc evidence I needed, a geological fact written in the language of trees. It wasn't just my word against Brad's anymore, it was nature's word. But it still wasn't enough to expose the whole fraud. I needed to connect Brad's insurance scam directly to his knowledge of this hidden threat. And then Sarah gave me the final piece. She was scrolling through her phone, looking at the county's public database for property permits. "That's odd," she muttered. "Brad's company, Clearview Brokerage, filed for a permit last year. It was for a geotechnical soil survey." My blood ran cold. "Where?" I asked. She showed me the screen. The coordinates were for a single point, not a wide survey area, one specific location. I pulled out my own handheld GPS and plotted the numbers. The point on my screen blinked. It was right where we were standing, in the heart of the landslide zone. He knew. The son of a bitch knew all along. He hadn't just stumbled upon this risk, he'd professionally surveyed it. He had a report, buried somewhere, that told him exactly how dangerous this hillside was. And instead of warning anyone, he'd used that knowledge to build a multi-million-dollar scam, leaving his neighbors sitting on a time bomb. It was no longer just about fraud. This was about endangerment. This was about a level of cynical greed that I could barely comprehend. Have you ever seen the dark side of a person you thought you knew? The moment you realize they're capable of anything for a profit, it changes you. We walked back in the growing darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting a shaky path through the trees. I had the truth, a complete terrifying picture of Brad's entire operation. But how do you show it to people who have already decided not to see? I couldn't just call another meeting. I couldn't just write another letter. He'd discredit me in a heartbeat. I needed a stage. I needed a moment so public and so dramatic that he couldn't spin his way out of it. The annual Homeowners Association budget meeting was in 2 days. It was my only shot, and I knew I couldn't afford to miss. The next 48 hours were a blur of quiet, focused activity. I felt like the old cartographer I once was, piecing together a map no one else could see. Sarah was my secret weapon. As a firefighter, she had access and credibility I lacked. She filed an official internal report about the blocked fire road and the unstable hillside, flagging it as an imminent public safety hazard. It was a slow-moving bureaucratic missile, but it was in the air. My part of the plan was riskier. It involved a bit of theater and a huge gamble on human nature. I needed to get someone from the real insurance company, not Brad's little brokerage, but the big faceless corporation that actually underwrote the policy, to the meeting. How do you get a corporate shark to swim into your little pond? You offer them bigger fish to fry. I spent a whole day on the phone, navigating automated menus and getting transferred from one board-sounding representative to another. I must have sounded like a lunatic. I have evidence of gross negligence and fraudulent misrepresentation by one of your agents, I kept repeating. Finally, I got a name, Mr. Davis, an underwriter in the regional office. He was dismissive at first, but I didn't give him accusations. I gave him data. I emailed him my old stereoscopic photos, Sarah's pictures of the pistol butt trees, and a screenshot of the permit for Brad's secret soil survey. I didn't ask him to believe me. I just asked him a simple question. Does Mr. Brad's policy for our community specifically cover geological events on the West Bank? And if it doesn't, what would be your company's liability if it was proven your agent knew about the risk and failed to disclose it? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the sound of a man doing rapid, unpleasant calculations in his head. The budget meeting is at 7 p.m. tomorrow, at the high school gym, I said. Be there. I hung up before he could say no. The night of the meeting, the gym was buzzing. The whole community was there, drawn by the promise of a final vote on Brad's budget. It felt like the final scene of a movie, and I still wasn't sure if I was the hero or the fool. I saw Brad at the front, schmoozing, shaking hands, looking every bit the conquering hero. He was going to get his $500,000 a year, and I was going to be a footnote in the minutes of the meeting. The meeting started. Brad took the stage. He was smooth, charming, and utterly convincing. He presented his budget with the massive line item for risk mitigation insurance. He called for a vote. Hands shot up all over the gym. It was going to be a landslide, a different kind of landslide. That's when I stood up. A groan went through the crowd. "Martin, sit down," someone yelled from the back. Brad just smiled that oily smile. "Martin, we've been over this. The community has decided." "Have they?" I said, walking slowly toward the stage. "Or have they been sold a bill of goods?" I had a projector cart with me, one I'd borrowed from the school's AV club. I plugged it in. On the giant screen behind Brad, 2 images appeared side by side. On the left was the slick, terrifying computer simulation from his expert, showing the fake landslide on the East Bank. On the right was one of my old black and white aerial photos. "This," I said, pointing to the simulation, "is the lie you were sold. And this," I pointed to the photo, "is the truth you were never shown." I used a laser pointer to trace the faint scar on the land, the real landslide. A confused murmur spread through the gym. It wasn't dramatic enough. It was just an old photo. Brad scoffed. More of your theories, Martin. Anyone can see things in clouds or in old pictures. The crowd laughed. He was winning again. My heart hammered against my ribs. My gamble had to pay off. I took a deep breath. You're right, Brad. It's hard to see, but you saw it, didn't you? You saw it so clearly you even paid for a soil test right on that spot. The laughter died. I clicked to the next slide. A screenshot of the permit, the coordinates circled in red. But don't take my word for it. I looked toward the back of the gym. I believe there's a gentleman here from the actual insurance company, Mr. Davis. Would you care to comment on whether your policy covers a landslide on the West Bank? And in that moment, the worst possible thing happened. Nothing. The back door was empty. The crowd turned, looked, and saw no one. There was just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Brad's smile turned into a triumphant, vicious grin. He had me. He had me dead to rights. I was a crazy old man, talking to an imaginary insurance agent, showing fuzzy pictures of a fake landslide. It was over. I had lost, completely and utterly. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over me, leaving me feeling small and powerless in front of my entire community. My grand plan had just exploded in my face. My grand plan had just exploded in my face. The silence in the gym stretched for an eternity, thick with ridicule. Brad let it hang there, savoring my humiliation. He opened his mouth, ready to deliver the final, killing blow. And then, the side door of the gym creaked open. It wasn't Mr. Davis. It was Sarah, in her full firefighter's turnout gear. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the fire alarm pull station on the wall, her face set and determined. "What are you doing?" Brad stammered, his victory speech forgotten. "My duty," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. She put her hand on the lever. As of 2 hours ago, the county fire marshal has declared this community's fire safety plan critically deficient based on my report. The main access is a bottleneck, and the secondary emergency route, the one your Homeowners Association has allowed to become overgrown and has erased from its maps, is impassable. Under County Ordinance 3B, in the event of a red flag warning, I am authorized to order an immediate evacuation of all homes deemed to be at unacceptable risk. She paused and let her words sink in. The National Weather Service issued a red flag warning for this county 30 minutes ago. High winds, low humidity, perfect fire conditions. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces. So, this is your choice. You can stay here and vote on Brad's budget, or you can go home, pack a bag, and evacuate. Because your insurance, it might cover a fake landslide, but it won't cover you when your house burns down because a fire truck couldn't get to it in time. Chaos. Absolute beautiful chaos. People were on their feet, shouting, pulling out their phones to check the weather alert. The meeting was over, the budget was forgotten. The only thing that mattered now was the real immediate danger Sarah had just unveiled. Brad was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. His carefully constructed world of fake risks had just been obliterated by a real one. In the ensuing panic, a man in a rumpled suit who had been sitting quietly in the third row stood up. He walked over to me, ignoring the tide of people heading for the exits. It was Davis. He'd been there all along, watching. "You've got guts, old man," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You just cost my company a fortune in potential liability claims. But you saved us more." He looked over at Brad, who was now being surrounded by angry homeowners. "Our firm will be terminating its relationship with Clearview Brokerage, effective immediately, and will be cooperating fully with the State Insurance Commission's fraud investigation." He handed me his card. "If you ever decide you want a job rooting out crooks like him, call me." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Victory didn't feel like I thought it would. It wasn't a sudden bright explosion. It was a slow rising tide. It was the sight of Brad, no longer the master of the universe, trying to explain himself to a crowd that was finally seeing him for what he was. But it wasn't over. As people streamed out of the gym, I saw one of the older residents, a man named Henderson, who lived in one of the houses directly below the landslide zone, clutch his chest and stumble. The stress, the panic, it was too much. People screamed. Someone called 911. Paramedics rushed in. They needed to get him to the hospital, fast. The main road out of the community was already a parking lot. a gridlock of panicked residents trying to flee. The ambulance was trapped. The lead paramedic ran over to Sarah. "Is there another way out?" he yelled. "The main road is jammed." Sarah looked at me. Our eyes met across the chaotic gym. We both knew the answer. There was another way. A road that existed on my old map. A road choked with weeds and neglect. A road that led right past a truth Brad had tried to bury. A road that was now the only hope for the man whose life was hanging in the balance. It was time to see if a 50-year-old map and a forgotten gravel path could save a life. The final test wasn't about insurance or money. It was about something far more valuable. And the clock was ticking. The clock was ticking. "This way!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the noise. I didn't wait for a response. I ran, my old bones protesting, out of the gym and toward the west edge of the community. A small crowd followed, Sarah, the paramedics with their stretcher, and a handful of stunned but determined neighbors who had seen the truth in Sarah's words. We reached the overgrown entrance to the fire road. It looked impassable, a wall of thorns and branches. "It's no good," one of the paramedics shouted. But he didn't know the people of this town. Not really. Without a word, two of the men, construction workers who had been yelling at me just an hour before, threw themselves at the brush, tearing at it with their bare hands. Others joined in, ripping away branches, kicking aside fallen logs. Adrenaline and a shared sense of purpose accomplished in minutes what would have taken me a day. They cleared a path just wide enough for the stretcher. We moved fast, a strange procession through the dark woods. The beam of my flashlight danced ahead, picking out the path. We could hear the siren of the approaching ambulance, stuck on the main road, a useless wailing ghost. We were on our own. We reached the spot, the hidden landslide zone. The tilted trees stood like silent, accusing witnesses in the darkness. We guided the paramedics and the stretcher carefully across the unstable ground. For a terrifying moment, the earth shifted under our feet, a soft, sickening groan from deep within the hill. Everyone froze, but it held. We made it to the other side, to the part of the road that was less overgrown. From there, it was a half-mile run to the county road on the other side. As we broke through the trees, we saw it, the flashing lights of a second ambulance, one that Sarah had called to this alternate access point. They got Henderson loaded up and were gone in a flash, sirens screaming into the night. We stood there, gasping for breath, covered in scratches and dirt, watching the taillights disappear. We had done it. The aftermath was swift. Brad was finished, stripped of his license, facing a fraud investigation and a dozen civil lawsuits. The Homeowners Association was dismantled and reformed under a new charter, one that I helped write. The fire road was cleared and properly marked. The unstable hillside was stabilized, the work paid for by a grant Sarah helped secure. A few weeks later, I was sitting on my porch. The lake was calm, the air was clean. The ugly white sign on my pier was gone, taken down by the same neighbors who had helped clear the road. Mr. Davis, the underwriter, had called me twice about that consulting job, a chance to get back in the game, to have my expertise valued again, a chance to make a lot of money and earn back the career that had been taken from me. Have you ever gotten everything you thought you wanted, only to realize it wasn't what you needed at all? I turned him down. My fight wasn't about a career. It was about my home. It was about the lines on a map being true. It was about a community remembering how to be neighbors. My victory came at a cost. The quiet peace I had before was gone. Now, people stopped by to ask my opinion on things. They wanted me on committees. They saw me as a leader. I was no longer just Martin, the quiet old map maker. I was the man who had seen the truth. It was a heavier burden than I ever wanted. The easy anonymity of my retirement was a casualty of this war. I looked at my old stereoscope sitting on the table. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to look through it. I didn't need to see the world in 3 dimensions anymore. I'd seen its hidden depths up close. I picked it up, walked to the end of my pier, and just held it. The cool brass, a familiar weight in my hand. I looked out over the water, not as a set of risks and property lines, but just as a lake, my lake. And for the first time since that hot summer day when Brad's boat first appeared, it felt like it was truly mine again.